Is this on? Yes. All right. Let's start coming back in, sitting down. Ooh. Thank you. Just going to give it one more minute for people to come in. All right. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for joining us back here. Really excited to be moderating this panel and this section, actually. My name is Martina De Maio. I am the Scientific Director at the International Alliance, and I'll be your moderator for the ALS MND Connect session. And if you think I didn't get the memo and I'm wearing yesterday's color, joke's on you, because I got burgundy as well. So today, to start off, we have a special video introduction from the Alliance Pulse and Cults Advisory Council, which I think is going to play soon.
G'day everyone, my name is Bruce Berger. I'm an Aussie living in Scotland. I'm also a person living with ALS MND. It is encouraging to see how research around the world is continuing to move forward, not just in the science itself, but in the way people with lived experience are being included in shaping it. The collaboration and dedication I see across countries and organizations truly gives me hope that we're shifting the needle toward better understanding, better treatments, and ultimately a cure. There's still work to do to ensure that research efforts reach underrepresented regions and communities, but it's reassuring to see real steps being taken to make this change. Inclusion is growing, and with it, the strength and reach of our collective impact. As someone living with this disease, I'm deeply grateful to the researchers, advocates, and organizations working tirelessly to progress their research. These efforts remind us that every step, no matter how small, brings us closer to meaningful change. Let's keep working together, sharing knowledge and pushing forward so that research continues to reflect the voices and priorities of the people it aims to help. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Bruce, and all the Pulse and Cults Advisory Council. So now I would like to welcome our panel, which is entitled What is Meaningful Inclusion? And I will be your moderator for this panel, but I'd like to call to the stage Kathy Cummings, Nortina Sharazala, and Janine Hackman, please. Yeah.
It's quite bright.
All right. Are we all ready?
I didn't bring any notes.
That's okay.
You don't need notes.
So, as I said, I'll be moderating this exciting panel. And really, we thought, we had conversation throughout the year and what could be something that we bring up that would be interesting and meaningful to discuss. And we've often found ourselves talking about inclusion in research. But the word meaningful, it really is key here. And today we'll explore what that looks like in practice, especially in contexts that are limited in resources or access generally to therapy, clinical trials, or even care, and where representation can vary greatly. But if I can ask the panel to introduce themselves very briefly.
Hi, everyone. I wanted to just thank the Alliance for including me in this session. My name is Nortina Shahrizaila. I'm a neurologist based in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. And I'm also currently the lead of the Pan-Asian Consortium for Treatment and Research in ALS, which is the Asia-Pacific group for the ALS network. And it's really lovely to be in Toronto. First time, and it's fantastic.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Janine Heckman. I'm a neurologist from Cape Town, South Africa. And I guess I'm here to represent the voices of Africans with ALS.
Thank you. I'm Kathy Cummings, the CEO of the International Alliance of ALS MND Associations.
All right, thank you very much. So let's start broadly. So when you hear the term meaningful inclusion, what does it mean to you in your context, in your work, in your community, or in your region? If you just want to have a short reflection about that, and then we can dive deeper.
Okay.
Whoever.
So it looks like I'm starting. So we're going to move this around, I hope. Okay, so two things. So from my perspective, so you've got meaningful inclusion, so you're talking about it from as a neurologist. So that would be making sure, so where I work, so I've actually had a background where I used to work in the UK for about 20 years and then came back to Malaysia. So it was very, very different settings. So whereas when I was in the UK, looking after, being in the MND Clinic, looking after the patients there, patients were very much involved in the conversation. Whereas when moving to Malaysia, it's a very different perspective. They're not always involved in the conversations. There is that hierarchical perspective. So trying to change that mindset. So that's from a patient-doctor perspective. From a global perspective, I'm also very mindful of Malaysia. Even though it's not a low-income country, we are surrounded by neighbors that are. So making sure that not just within the country, not just amongst the different countries, but within each countries, there will always be individuals who are underrepresented. So meaningful inclusion also includes that perspective as well. So both perspectives involving patients, in the decision-making process, and also making sure the underrepresented is always in the conversation. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nortina. Yes, for me to answer this question about what is meaningful inclusion, I would almost say any inclusion would be meaningful, because there are so many of people living with ALS in Africa that are, either don't know that they have MND ALS, or have extremely limited resources. I was just struck by the reference to the, what was it called, the Fundamental Rights Survey. And I bet there will be very few African voices being heard in that fundamental rights survey, because so many of my patients don't even have access to a smartphone or data so that they can actually complete those kinds of surveys. So yes, so I would say that starting point would be that any inclusion of our patients' voices, and I'm also very grateful to be able to sit here and talk about this at this meeting. So thank you.
Thank you.
I think a lot about intersectionality when we talk about meaningful inclusion, and we've all been in meetings where, you know, we're asked for feedback or we're included, but it's not really true that they don't want my feedback or they don't want to include me, that it's some sort of tokenism. And for me, what meaningful inclusion means is that we think about those lenses in advance. You know, have we thought about all of the underrepresented communities? Have we thought about all of the stakeholder groups that need to be included and where those voices are important? And then to make it meaningful, we have to truly want the feedback that we're going to hear, whether it's positive or negative. And I know we're focusing on meaningful inclusion in research here on this particular panel. So again, I think the word meaningful is very important here because, you know, when you look at even the research that was presented yesterday on delayed diagnosis or time to diagnosis, you can see that the research, you know, there are huge gaps. And so it would be meaningful to start to include those communities and those stakeholder groups so that we understand, because I truly believe we're never going to understand ALS until we understand the whole world.
Thank you. And I just wondering, can any of you, maybe to answer, you know, Nortina's request, well, we can start with you, Janine, but can you think of any practical examples where like meaningful inclusion or inclusion generally has made a difference for you specifically or for your region?
Yes, I mean, I think that we're going to come to examples further down the line. But I think that, you know, hearing, certainly my patients have said that we've been involved in a biomarker development program, and those patients, you know, really enjoyed being part of it. They looked forward to coming to research visits. They felt that they were part of a bigger community. They felt that it empowered them. They were fighting this disease. So there's no doubt that being part of something bigger has a lot of impact for them personally. And for me as a doctor, it also shifts the conversation into a much more positive realm when you give a diagnosis, but you can say, look, we don't have therapies, but we can offer you something, and to be included in that. So that really made a difference. I know that my colleagues elsewhere in Africa are sort of fighting, poorly educated, other clinicians that are just poorly educated in terms of ALS care, because often patients get a diagnosis and gets told that there's nothing that can be done for them. And so they don't even come back to the clinic or to the doctors. They go elsewhere for either spiritual, or traditional healing. So I think education, being part of a program, gives the patient doctor a different kind of conversation that we can have. It gives the patient something that they feel that they're being held, that they are contributing to the bigger picture, and they're very happy to do that. Very few patients said no. But we also need to educate people and the doctors.
Thank you so much. Kathy, you want to?
I have an example as well, not related to scientific research so much as voice preservation. We had two projects that focused on voice preservation in South America. One was Google approached us to say that they had a voice preservation system that wanted to understand the nuances between the different Spanish dialects within South America. So Jessica coordinated a project with all of our member associations that have Spanish-speaking members, and those individuals were invited to participate in a research project specifically. It wasn't that they were going to get a product afterwards or anything like that. It was truly a research project. And it was a great opportunity for people to be included in research where they, our fundamental rights survey clearly tells us people want to be involved in research. And there are areas of the world where research opportunities don't come that often. So we got a lot of positive feedback about being included in research in Spanish-speaking countries.
Thank you. Martina, do you want to?
Okay.
You don't have to.
Well, I think what Janine had mentioned is similar to the sort of move in how clinical care is being delivered in our part of the world. So where, certainly I see for the ALS, MND patients having that community support, even though there is no drug per se that they have access to, or clinical trials. I'm going to start bringing all of this up. We never get included in clinical trials, but that's a separate issue altogether. But just knowing that, I think that's new for our patients to have that community support, to have that multidisciplinary approach that we were able to establish. And I know they spoke really highly of the session that the Alliance did at PACTELS in Kuala Lumpur in 2023, because I don't think they've ever had, so it's a little bit like this, but they've never had that exposure before. So I thought that was really, that was really made a difference to the MND community, certainly in our part of the world. From a research perspective, I think we are heading that way. I love working with the Alliance. It's not because you invited me here, but I just feel like, we have individuals or groups that want to include because, you have to have diversity, that kind of tokenism that you said. But I think with the Alliance, it's been genuinely involving the community, the underrepresented. And I know in terms of research grants, I was just talking to Dave earlier about this, and that's basically it's making sure that the action actually happens, because we have lots and lots of meetings about how we can include the underrepresented. But for it to be meaningful, it has to be an action item. It has to actually happen, as opposed to being seen to have included. And the approach, we're going to probably talk about this, but the approach has got to be a little bit different to how it's being done thus far, I think. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
So I'm usually the troublemaker, so I'll just...
Well, you're here. I have a question for Kathy later, but I just want to dig into what you just said. So, like, in terms of, what does that strategy looks like? What do you think needs to happen differently? And I'm not expecting you to come up with a plan. Maybe you already have it in your back pocket.
Well,
but
can you get my list of people?
No, but I'm just thinking, like, just to give some more practical examples of what does that different look like?
So I guess if we're talking about research, for instance, let's just take research in terms of the approach. I think more and more what I've been seeing is that, we've realized, like what Kathy said, for us to really understand or eventually find a cure, you really have to understand the world, not just groups of ALS populations. And thus far, a lot of the research is being done in mainly high-income Western populations, and to be inclusive, to include the global population. So you're now seeing, and we've seen this in Parkinson's disease, for instance, and we're now seeing it in ALS, where more and more we're trying to have a more diverse population. But it's not just about, there has to be respect in terms of the individuals that you're working with. You have to understand that we may be in lower income country, but it doesn't mean that we're less good or less knowledgeable. It's just that the circumstances that we're in means that we're not able to do higher impact research. So I think when you come to the table, I think acknowledging us as partners, as opposed to just, someone that can just contribute to ensure that you have that diverse population and meet your KPI or whatever. Just really, that's what I mean, meaningful inclusion. It's because I think we do have the smarts, we just don't have the resource.
Yeah, no, I agree. So it's more than just sample collection for the core group. Or
yep. Yeah, so it's really engaging and meaningfully discussing how the research can be taken forward, and also respecting the nuances that comes with different groups of people, different culture, different social, economic status that many people in this room probably are not aware of. I mean, sometimes I don't really also know what's happening in my part of the world as well. So we can't just assume going in there. And that respect, you have to build that trust. And to build that trust, for instance, we've got indigenous population in Malaysia, but to build the trust, they just assume that you're going to come and you're just going to take something away from them. You have to engage and care first, and then talk about research and the importance of it, but also know that there is that autonomy not to be part of it, because it's not about your agenda, it's about what works for everybody, and respecting that.
Yeah, and thank you for saying that. And I have to say, even just from my personal experience being at Pactals in September, I've discovered aspects of the population that was presented there that I wasn't aware of. Even just the frequency of genetic variants is different from what we as Europeans or at least Europeans descendant I used to see. You can ask me about this later if you want, but I'm not going to go into details. But I was very, it changed my vision, and I think it would be the experience of a lot of people if they were exposed to that kind of data, and to the population and to the requests that are happening here. If I can just ask Kathy, what does meaningful inclusion in research means at the Alliance, given that we're at the Alliance meeting?
So we have 5 principles. I think this is what you want me to answer.
Familiar.
Yeah. We have 5 principles that drive everything that we do, and I think they really speak to meaningful inclusion. So everything we do is at the global level. We don't work at the local level. We don't work at the regional level, but we do try and integrate with those levels. But the work we actually do is at the global. We enable global collaboration. So that's one of our principles, is that we try and stick to the global level. We stick to our open science statement that the board passed a few years ago. We believe strongly in open sharing of data and so on. We also try and avoid duplication. We are in a very privileged position at the Alliance where we get insight into different parts of the world. And sometimes we see that, someone in one part of the world is working on a project and someone on the other side of the world is working on the exact same project. And we try and bring those together so that there's no duplication. I understand from a scientific and research point of view, sometimes you have to duplicate to prove that something's really working, but at the Alliance level, we try and avoid duplication. And the number one principle that we have at the Alliance, of course, we already talked about a little bit this morning, is we include the voices of people with lived experience in everything that we do. They're at the center of our universe. And the last principle of the 5 principles is that we try and include underrepresented communities. And I shouldn't have used the word try in that sentence. We include underrepresented communities in everything that we do. So we, if we're doing an education session, we would never just have a presenter from Canada or a presenter from Holland or anything like that. We make sure that we have diverse organizations represented and so on. And it's the same in research. If we're putting together a global task force on something, we make sure that every region is represented in that global task force, which sometimes means when we're reaching into underrepresented communities that we task the same people all the time. So I'm sorry in advance, Janine and Nortina, that we ask you to do so many things because that's an important piece to us, is that we include people from areas that, and we do try and share the love. We do invite other people too, but the reality is that there's only a few people working in ALS MND on the African continent. So we have a smaller pool to draw from, but we do want to be inclusive. So that's the most, they're all important, all 5 of those principles. And I would say the first among equals is the inclusion of lived experience, but a very close second would be the inclusion of underrepresented communities. And I just want to say one more quick thing about that it's not all about geography. Even in a country like Canada, where I'm from, there are underrepresented communities, whether it's by population type or by rural and urban divide. And there are lots of other global north countries where there are underrepresented communities in the ALS MND community. So that's why we use the word community, not necessarily always tying it to geography, but we are careful to tie it to geography where we have to.
Thank you. And then, Janine, if you could maybe comment on, funding and what that means in terms of, like, when we talk about meaningful inclusion, how much does funding matter in this conversation? For example, grants that may be going to underrepresented regions, or generally, what's your take on coming from a under-researched area, what kind of help would that give?
Yeah. Well, we obviously all need funding. I think that Malinka Botha yesterday from the Motor Neuron Disease Association of South Africa showed that it's possible to do a lot with very little. And I think that's true, because we start at a very low base in our neck of the woods, and so a small amount of money you can really make it go a long way. It's difficult for us because we start from a low base to compete on the global scene. We were very grateful for the ALS Association to give us a seed grant a few years ago, and we really stretched that and made that work in a big way. But it's difficult, I think that I know that there's a conversation amongst various people in this room about how to think more creatively about funding projects in the resource-limited setting, including South America, India, Africa, and Southeast Asia. And I think we have to put our heads together and really think about that creatively, because it would be difficult for us to compete. Everybody's competing, and we just we're not in the same league. We can't. Yes, from a scientific level and from a resource, from a capacity level.
Yeah, and I guess that applies a similar concept to clinical trials as well, an expectation from industry.
Yes, I think that clinical trials. I mean, Tina's already alluded to that, and I will leave that to her.
No, Tina's favorite time.
There's no doubt that we will have to. Not everywhere. There are a few discrete areas that we could actually start doing a clinical trial tomorrow, but in the vast, most of the places, we're going to need a bit of investment to actually uplift these areas so that trials can happen. It will be worth it for the patients, and I think that there will be a sort of a feed-forward cycle, in that if you invest a little bit, you will actually, capacity will build, and it will start, and getting trials in will actually build further capacity, and maybe that's where you must enter.
You've said it already. So they're just laughing because when it comes to clinical trials and the non-inclusion would be the word. I think we're seeing it now, with the SOD1, because obviously with tofersen in play, they're now looking at communities where tofersen is not available, and I'm just saying, telling it like it is, and that really shouldn't be happening that way. It should really be from the start that we are involved anyway, not just because our patients are not on tofersen. Sorry, I can't see. You've got me off track. What was I supposed to talk about?
Well, you got a minute or less.
A minute to tell you all about the non-inclusion. Well, no, I think seriously, when it comes to research, we were talking about being inclusive in research. I will share the ALS Association. We've got Kelanit here, obviously. ALS Association, our research group has been basically relying on the money from the ALS Association for the last God knows how long. We've managed to extend, even though the grant is given for a year, but the quantum goes so far that we've been able to basically define our genetic population, been able to now look at the role of tropical infections in terms of how it affects patients living with ALS. So these are really, I think, meaningful and very different projects. And it's not to say to take this away from, the obviously very high-end research that is happening. It's just that it is important to understand the rest of the world, because we're talking about populations where the genetic landscape is going to be very different. The environmental factors, the cultural setting, the social, all of that aspect, which we know contributes towards ALS. We understand that in neurodegenerative diseases. So I think it's important, again, just to, if possible, whatever that's being done, just to ensure that communities that can be represented are, you're reaching out to those communities. I mean, there will be situations where it's just very difficult. With the clinical trials, actually, I completely understand that it is so much easier for companies to go to countries where there is already a CRO, everything is established, etc. But there is also the human side of things, like what Janine had been, alluded to, is that there is an opportunity to invest and really elevate the level of care to those communities. They may not have the drugs, but just by being there, and even if it takes a bit of time, I think it's worthwhile in the long run. So yeah, sorry, that's more than 1 minute. Sorry.
No, yeah.
Can I add a comment? I know we're running out of time.
Yeah.
May I just add a quick comment on what Nortina just said? Okay, very quick. So we know from our fundamental rights survey data, we are able to correlate certain parts of that data. And we understand from our global community that if someone is able to participate in a clinical trial, they think they have access to the highest quality treatments and the highest quality care. So there's a component of it, an emotional and mental health component too, that if we're more inclusive of different regions and communities within clinical trials, we're impacting more than just the research. We're impacting the care landscape. We're impacting what people think about their own quality of life and their own mental health.
Thank you. No, that was great. Thank you for adding that. Just want to see if there's any questions online or on the floor. Yeah.
Is the microphone on? Okay, great. So we've got Gudjon from Iceland. It says inclusion has made all the difference over there, and just think of the difference that UPALS has made. But his question is, what do you make of AI and telemedicine, and is that going to make a difference for inclusivity?
So AI telemedicine, and if that's going to make a difference in terms of
AI
inclusion.
telemedicine, this is assuming that the other end has got the resource to get onto telemedicine to start
Right.
with. So it's not
That's
that.
an issue in itself.
So this is another issue because I'm not involved. I mean, I'm involved in AI, not within the Alliance group, but there's always this pitch that it's going to change the world in limited resource settings. But the word here is limited resource settings. Do they even have access? I mean, it's nice to theorize that, but I don't know. Is the question? Is the answer?
Yeah, no, that was a good question. I see a question from the floor.
Kalanit's got a question there, and there's another one there.
Sorry. Hi,
Go,
yeah,
yes.
go.
Oh, hi, Allison from the United States. Thank you all for your knowledge and your true compassion that comes through in everything you just said. Thank you. When we started talking about meaningful inclusion, we were talking about communication, and I know we moved into research, which is so critical, but I want to go back to communication for just a second and ask you, so when I think of meaningful inclusion, I also think of it having to be valuable and also purposeful. So when I look at purposeful, we can't necessarily group a patient into just one group. Are the patients involved in this? Rather, look at the person, because we were lives in progress before ALS came. Some of us were professionals, some were doctors, some were communications professionals. Like, at any point in meaningful and valuable and purposeful inclusion, do you take the person into account?
Absolutely, is the answer. We were just talking about that earlier today, and as Kaldip said in his presentation, if you've met one person with ALS, you've met one person with ALS. It doesn't represent a community, and so some of the things we look at in terms of inclusion is, other skill sets, competencies, and I can't relate that in the moment to research per se, but when we're looking at any form of education that we do or task forces that we have, we look at a whole different lens of criteria to make sure that we're getting a good balance and as you said, purposeful inclusion.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Kalanit.
Oh, thanks.
Can
you hear me? Yep. Okay. I'm not sure I have a question, maybe just more of a comment or observation. As sitting there thinking, this association's given Nortina funding, South Africa funding, South America capacity funding, but the ALS Association can't do that globally. I mean, we don't have that capacity. And I'm wondering, as we go forward through the course of the next couple of days and through strategic planning, if Martina, as you're working with the RDF and you're working with the SAC and all these other groups, how does the International Alliance maybe step forward in being a pinnacle of these conversations to bite them off? Because there are a lot of different pieces that you hit on. Clinical trial capacity, right? Capacity, whether it's care and being on the front end of that, but we have to somehow as a global community agree to create a foundation for that. And so I'm actually putting that out there as thought-provoking, more for the next few days, and something with whoever's in the room that's going to be part of the strategic planning process, to put that on the docket for the International Alliance. I know there's been conversations, some of us were just in Australia and had a similar conversation. There's been conversations in the United States, but I'm wondering, Kathy, if it, you're welcome. I'm leaving, bye. I can sit with you.
Thank you to our past chair for throwing that. I just wanted to clarify, Kalanit used 2 short forms in her comment, which is RDF, which is the Research Directors Forum. So all of the research directors from our member associations that are on staff of our member associations gather together in a forum to talk about research funding, the active research landscape, and so on. And the second short form Kalanit used was SAC, which is our Scientific Advisory Council. So that is the external advisors who are neurologists, research directors, and researchers who provide evidence-based information to our broader community. So I just wanted to clarify those 2. Thank you.
Yeah, and I mean, Kathy, maybe you want to jump in here, but this conversation, thank you for that comment. It's super important, and the Alliance has been thinking about this also with other organizations that are very keen on supporting this kind of efforts. I completely agree. It can't be just the ALS Association. If this is a global effort, then we definitely want to involve as many organizations as possible and as many as there are interested in this kind of project. And it's something that we'll certainly discuss with the RDF. We have our meeting tomorrow, so that's on the agenda. It's definitely in the conversations. But thank you to the ALS Association to in the past have supported these efforts because it's super important. And I think we need to wrap up, unfortunately. But if you do have other questions, please feel free to reach out to any of the panelists through the app or just here as they're walking around. But thank you so much for this insightful panel and conversation. So it's great. All right, and I realized I forgot to mention that ALS MND Connect is streamed live on Facebook, and so welcome to those joining us from there as well. Bad moderator. We now go to our next agenda item. So thanks again to our panelists. This was wonderful. We have our SAC, or Scientific Advisory Council, update coming up, and so please join me, Nick Cole, Kaldeep Dave, Janine Hackman, again, and Beck Sheehan. Welcome. This panel will be moderated by Nick Cole, who's also the chair of our SAC. And I'll be joining you.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. It's been a fantastic couple of days so far. So, as Martina said, I'm Nick Cole from the MND Association of the UK, of England, Wales and Northern Ireland in the UK. And so the Scientific Advisory Council, we're a small proportion of it, representing it. So the idea of it is it's a centralised resource, really, with a global perspective. So we kind of take scientific announcements and information and try to distill it in the best way possible for the community, really, to understand exactly what's going on. So we've got members from many different places across the world: UK, USA, China, South Africa, Colombia, Italy, Australia, to name but a few. So what's really important as well to state is that we really understand and value in everything that we do that behind every bit of scientific information and every data point is a person that's lived or been affected by MND and ALS, and we never forget that also in our approach. And I think that's a really something that's really exemplified and demonstrated by this meeting. So what we're going to do is we're going to have an introduction from each of the panel members, and they're just going to tell us something that's interesting them or something that they think is important for us to discuss. Maybe that will stimulate some questions, and then we'll have a Q&A session at the end where there's time to answer questions from our online audience and also from the audience in the room. So without further ado, I'll pass down to Beck to introduce herself.
Thanks,
Nick. So I'm Beck Sheehan. I'm the Research Director at Fight MND in Australia.
Well, you've met me already, but my name is Martina De Mayo. I'm the Scientific Director of the International Alliance.
And you know that I'm Janine Heckman. I'm a neurologist from South Africa, Cape Town.
And I'm Kuldip Dave, Senior Vice President of Research at the ALS Association.
Thanks very much. So if we can start with you, Beck, if you want to just give us a minute or so on what you think is really catching your eye or is of interest that you'd like to talk about.
So even though I have a background in preclinical research, I think the thing that's really exciting me is the amount of activity and momentum in the care research space and just how much is happening in that space and that impact it can have for people living with MND. And I think also the involvement of people with lived experience in all of those research programs as well is really important. One of the other areas I think which is really exciting is the use of AI in care research. I think we've heard a number of talks across these 2 days where we're really starting to see innovation, I think just really starting to scratch the surface, and whether it's in research around speech, or I know some really exciting projects looking at using AI with non-invasive ventilation to be able to do some remote changes so that a person doesn't need to come into clinic but can adjust their non-invasive ventilation from home. So I think that's really exciting. And for those who aren't familiar with it, another exciting use of AI is as part of the Longitude Prize. So this is run by an organisation called ChallengeWorks. It's supported by a number of organisations, including the MND Association and Fight MND. And it's a really exciting project that's using AI to mine data from existing genomic data sets from all around the world. So it's a really exciting way to use that data that we've already collected and to mine that to look for potential drug targets. So another exciting way that AI is being used in the MND space.
Thank you, Beck. That's great. Okay, Martina.
Thank you. So ahead of this panel, we were kind of thinking about things that make us, excited in the field. And for me, it will be no surprise, given what my role is that I think access generally to therapies, to care, to research is really something that I feel passionate about. And I think it's something that the Alliance works very hard for, and this committee also, council, pardon me, also works on, for example, in general, we think about communication a lot. We have, I don't know if not everybody will know here, that on the Alliance website there is a section that is dedicated to briefing notes on either drugs that are in development or approved drugs, or drugs that are no longer in development. And particularly on the approved drugs section, we take care in adding a table at the top of each note saying where it is accepted, where it is approved, and where it is accessible. Because I think it's not very, at least for me, it wasn't super clear before I started really thinking about this, that if the FDA approves a treatment doesn't mean that the whole world has access to it. I mean, it sounds silly now saying it like this, but we tend to think that accepted therapies are automatically available everywhere, and they're really not. Thinking back at the conversation that we had before this panel. So that is something that we think a lot about, and I personally think a lot about. Access to clinical trials, access to care, access to genetic testing, for example. I probably don't need to tell this audience that there's a good portion of people that develop ALS that are carriers for variants, and that can be up to 20% of the people living with the disease. And obviously, if there is a genetic variant, then blood relatives are affected or can be affected as well. And so the Alliance particularly is leading an effort to create recommendations applicable at the global level for genetic counseling and testing. We are working very hard to make that happen. This project is brilliantly led by, managed by Christiana Salmon, whom many of you will know. But generally, I think thinking about access and thinking about how diverse the level of research and information we have in different areas is something that I think is very important, and maybe we don't talk about enough, or at least like I get that impression, and it's something that I wanted to bring to this table.
Do you want to just tell people where to find access to the briefing notes?
Yeah, thank you, Nick.
Okay.
So on the Alliance website, there's a section called Resources for PALS and CALS, and in that section, if you hover with your cursor on that, you have a drop-down menu, and you can see the different sections, and we really do our best to keep those up to date. Sometimes, we're slower than we would like to be, and sometimes things, especially in terms of access and approved therapies, might not be super up to date, so feel free to reach out to us and let us know if you spot anything that doesn't look right to you. But the SAC, know that the SAC is working hard in keeping those updated, and we hope that those are helpful to you, to the community generally.
Thank you, Martina. Janine?
So, as in the previous discussion, I'm really here to represent the under-resourced areas of the world, and again, I'm very grateful that I can be here as to be their voice. And yes, there are so many issues. You were talking about touching on a few of them. Access to a health care provider for diagnosis, access to care, access to, being aspirational about access to treatments one day, and also just very appreciative of the work that the Alliance is doing, and really, doing stuff, not just talking about it. I mean, so thank you.
And is that research work you're talking of something that can be done in isolation, or do you think you need to find a partner to do it?
Yes, so we were talking about this over tea this morning. One way to change that whole conversation about resource limitation is upliftment, and upliftment through research and education is definitely a possibility. We have to think creatively about it, as I said previously, and one possibility is to kind of develop partnerships between the well-resourced areas and a poorer resourced area, and that's possible to. With trust, as Nortina in the previous session also discussed, trust and respect. It's possible to have a partnership that can actually uplift, and have build on small steps and build a foundation that is sustainable, and in which there's also capacity building, because that's going to change things for the future.
And that's something you've seen in your work already, or is it something you would aspire?
Yes, no, we've already seen that with a project that we were involved with, and we were able to improve it was a project that was US based, and that through their mentoring and teaching and education. We were able to develop a broader base within our area, with ripple effects in that we would then be able to have a south-to-south collaboration with others in various other areas in Africa, and actually uplift them. So it was a kind of a tiered rippling, and it's. We've managed to sustain it. If you have the right people at the right place at the right time, and you're all working together, it's possible.
Yeah, thank you. Kuldip.
Yeah, I'm really excited about the fact that we are now starting to test therapies that are in the TDP-43 pathway. And, what do I mean by that? So 97% of people living with ALS if we look at the pathology in the brain and the spinal cord, there are these protein clumps, and these clumps or aggregates are full of TDP-43 protein. And for many years, we thought it was a chicken or the egg issue. We didn't know where TDP-43 fit. We now know that TDP-43 is an important protein that can lead to motor neurons dying. And so I'm really happy that a lot of our clinical therapies now are starting to look at that pathway upstream and downstream of that TDP-43 pathway. You have companies like Trace and Curalis and Vectory looking at protein targets like Stathmin and UNC13A and TDP-43 itself. We don't know whether this is the right hypothesis to go after, but we're not going to know until they get tested. And so I'm glad that we are starting to go after it. We have learned so much about this pathway in the last 3 or 4 years, and I'm glad that we're starting to test it. These trials are very early. Most of them are in phase 1. So we're not going to have an answer for another maybe 8-10 years, whether this is the right pathway to go after. But I'm really excited that we are going after it.
Yeah, really important, and hopefully some positive outcomes and therapies for everybody living with motor neuron disease. But I guess that's come on the back of such great discoveries from genetic MND, what we've learned so much from Qalsody, for example, and looking at neurofilament light as a marker, for example. So are those learnings being incorporated into these trials?
Yeah, and if they are not, they should be. I think Qalsody's experience, the accelerated approval that Qalsody received in the United States was based on its effect on NFL. And so I think all of these programs should be looking at neurofilament light as a biomarker, whether they're using it to stratify or balance the two groups that they're testing, placebo versus drug, whether they're using that as a way to look at baseline response or to look at drug response. I think, these programs should be including that. I think the other, as I said earlier, Qalsody, what we've learned is earlier the better. And so, we need to get people into trials as soon as they're diagnosed, which means we need to reduce time to diagnosis because we want to get people into trials as soon as their symptoms start. And perhaps, and you'll hear from Jean next, but perhaps even, can we get even earlier than that and get to people who are at risk and start testing them. So I think we have to change our thinking based on what we know now.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
Can I just add one point to that? I think one of the things from the Qalsody that I've sort of looked at learning from that is that just that importance of having that really good preclinical data and really understanding the target and how the drug interacts with the target, and not jumping too far ahead too quickly. And as much as we want to move things through to the clinic as quickly as possible so that people can have access to it, without investing in that research to understand that fundamental things that are happening in the motor neurons, or how the drug works, is the drug hitting the target? All of these things are really important so that when something is going into the clinic, it's got more chance for success.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Really important that having some target engagement that we can report on, for example. So as Kuldip was saying about the TDP work, that's looking at the exon skipping, UNC13A, for example. So there's something to look at and something to report on as well to show that it's working. And there are numerous examples that we try to temper, really, of where things have been moved on too quickly. But again, there's that balance of that pressure for funding to move things forward as well is also difficult. So, yeah, it's a great point, Beck. Thank you. So I think, should we open the floor to questions now, given the time? Okay, do we have some questions from the floor? Yes, Pablo. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Pablo from ELA Argentina and the International Alliance. So I know you guys don't like to talk too much in detail about specific clinical trials, and you can answer, so why you keep asking, Pablo, if you already know that, but I will ask anyway. I mean, is there any clinical trial that you would like to highlight? Anything that is ideally, in phase 2 or phase 3 stages that maybe keeps you up at night? Like, for example, Coldeep talked about the TDP-43 efforts, which is good and is exciting too, but maybe you can mention a couple more. Okay, thank you.
Sure, yeah. Who wants to take that? I'm thinking from the top of my head about fuzz trials, some of the perceived lack of success of the C9 work as well, which is, we've got some learnings from that as well. Do you want to take some of that, Coldeep? Are you happy with?
I think what keeps, one good and one bad. So what keeps me up, I think, is our trials where there aren't a target engagement marker. And, if the trial fails, we have no idea whether it failed because it just didn't do biologically what it was supposed to do. And even after learning what we have in the last 2 decades, I'm not going to name names, but there are trials ongoing right now that are happening without a target engagement marker. And it is really frustrating because if it's successful, if the trial is successful, we don't probably care. We care, but we don't probably care that there's no target engagement. But especially if it fails, we care. We want to know whether we should close the door on that target or it was just the wrong drug. It never did anything what it was supposed to. So that's what keeps me up. It's really frustrating that companies are going forward and doing all of the stuff that Beck talked about in terms of target validation, but when they're not thinking about that. What makes me excited is the fact that Qalsody opened the doors on using antisense oligonucleotide technology. The Qalsody is a type of drug that goes and changes your mRNA and to change the protein, abnormal protein that is being produced. And, just a few years ago, there was worry about safety and using ASOs and giving it, now we have people who have taken, Larry Falavina, our chair of our board, I think has taken, monthly injections of Qalsody for the last 5 years, because he was in that initial phase 2 trial with Biogen and then the Valor trial. That is amazing. Think about having to go in and taking monthly intraspinal injections of a drug of a technology we thought was not safe. Now that technology is safe and is being used to go after other genes and other sporadic targets. So I think those are the two, sort of good and the bad.
Mm. And if we think of the talk that we heard yesterday night from that young man that also goes, it's a similar story to what you were saying, like the effect on people, and it's very exciting.
Yeah. Do you want to just expand on that for people who might not have seen it?
Yeah, of course. I'm sorry, you're right. So last night we heard from a young man who shared his experience, and he's a carrier for the for a SOD1 variant, and his mom was diagnosed with ALS and has been very responsive to Qalsody and has been in the trial and has been treated. And just hearing that story was very inspiring in terms of hearing how these kind of treatments, which are targeted and effective, and of course this is the first example of a therapy being so successful, really change people's lives. And so that was very touching, and I think it's very fitting with what you were saying.
Yeah, and I think really to answer your question, if we sat here and said we're more excited about this, I think the key to it is we are excited and interested in things when they've been done properly and they read out and we have a marker that shows it works. A good example of a new sort of concept of trial would be Experts ALS, run through the UK, through the Virtual Research Institute. So this is looking at the level of neurofilament light chain and a sort of more rapid way of screening compounds to prioritize which ones go forward into a bigger clinical trial. So the concept being that if the compound works, the level of neurofilament will fall rapidly, which is what we see from tofersen, from Qalsody. And so that will give an indication that that drug is potentially advantageous to move forward into the next phase, into a larger trial. So those kind of targeted, this is a real biological response that we really need before we move things forward. So those are the kind of things that get me excited. There are a lot of trials as well that have come and gone, and a lot of trials at the moment that are in the pipeline. So, you know, we're really hopeful that all those things are done properly and we get great outcomes, of course. But there are some that kind of catch the eye a little bit.
Can I just say one point? Sorry. I was thinking about something with trials that excited me that really has come out recently, really just this week, which was a publication of a project that is very close to Vitamin D's heart, because it was really the vision of one of our founders, Dr. Ian Davis. So it's actually not a clinical trial, except that it is a clinical trial, but in the dish. So it's using human cells from 100 patient lines. And it's a group out of Melbourne that just published in Nature Neuroscience. So using the human cells, they were actually able to show for the first time some disease phenotype and also do some high throughput drug screening. So they repeated basically every trial that's ever been run in ALS in the dish, and they were able to replicate what they saw in the clinic as well. So they saw an extension of the time that the cells could survive in the dish with treatments like Riluzole. And they also were able to screen some combination therapies as well. And they saw when they combined a couple of drugs together that they had an added benefit. So it's a great new resource or new tool that could potentially look at screening drugs in the dish before it moves into clinical trial.
Yeah, I think that's emphasising really the importance of having good models, ways of looking at the biology of motor neuron disease. You know, we've still got so much to learn as well before we get to that clinical trial phase. So there are some very good, clever methods for looking at that biology and how compounds can change that. Nice point, Beck. Thank you.
That's a question.
Sorry. Hi.
Hi. So I have a question. I think it's directed to the previous panel and this panel, but I want to know, how can we convince the industry that it's not just only ethical and essentially scientifically and strategically worthwhile to include people living with ALS from the global south in clinical trials, and what practical steps could we take as a community to make trials in the global south a reality?
Yeah, great question, and something that's really at the forefront of all of our minds. I can think of Janine could answer some of that, and then maybe we'll come back to Beck. Janine?
It's such a huge question. I mean, it's a fantastic question, but it's such a huge question that I'm not sure where I must start. I think, you know, talking about it is fantastic, and it's almost as if we have to get industry and the big players to adopt this as a strategy, so that we can really actionalize it. And I think Nortina has also been very vocal about, you know, let's stop talking about it, but actually start doing something about it, so that the conversation changes in 5 years' time. We're not having the same conversation. But I think Calder, do you want to?
Yeah, I think you have to incentivize. You know, Vitamin D has been doing this. You know, this is really interesting, but we just had letters of intent were due for the clinical trial awards that we're going to be giving out. It's $1 million for early stage trials. And one of the companies, you know, made an appointment to speak to me because they were worried about applying to our program because they were going to do the trial out of Europe and US. So they were not going to use sites in Europe, and they thought because of that their application would not be competitive or would not be included in our, would not qualify. And, you know, we have funded trials that are completely outside of United States and Europe. And so I think that incentivization is also going to be helpful. But there are companies that are, I think, trying to think in a creative way, going out of sort of the typical places. The other place is building capacity. I mean, we funded the Alliance actually, and Jess and Kathy to drive in South American countries, drive capacity. I know Target ALS. Think they're not here, but they are starting to work in developing capacity to collect genetic samples. So if there's capacity to do that, then maybe industry will say, okay, if they can do X and Y, maybe they can also do a clinical trial, right? So I think we just have to get that kind of fear that we don't know outside of US and Europe what the trials will look like.
Thank you. Sorry to cut that short. Well, you didn't cut it short, but I've been told we've got 1 minute left, so we've got one more question we can fit in.
This is from Alpa in Turkey. It's something to think about. It's not a question. But saying, regarding tofersen, accelerated FDA approval and subsequent EMA approval are important. However, the fact that it's still in phase 3 and NFL levels aren't considered a definitive biomarker means different perceptions in each country. There's a fine line between the drug's high cost and its disease-modifying effect. This threatens the chances of receiving the drug in the early stages of the disease. So just something to think about, been posed there from Turkey.
Okay.
Now
We couldn't hear you, Jen, sorry. What was the question?
Yeah, something along the lines of NFL is not considered a biomarker, so there's different...
Do you want me to read it again?
Yeah, you'll have to shout.
Okay,
sorry.
called it, listen. Regarding tofersen, accelerated FDA approval and subsequent EMA approval are important. However, the fact that it's still in phase 3 and LFL levels aren't considered a definitive biomarker means different perceptions in each country. There's a fine line between the drug's high cost and its disease-modifying effect. This threatens the chances of receiving the drug in the early stages of the disease. Something to think about, not a question.
Gosh. Yeah, I think that's getting to the variation in access in different countries. Yeah.
We're back to inclusivity.
I mean, that is something that we want to resolve across the world for sure.
In fact, there was nearly a question that we didn't get to before, and that was saying about if we are looking at inclusivity, is it something we should be doing and advocating for drug availability on a global level?
Yes, we definitely should do. I mean, we are. Should we be campaigning for equal access to medication across the globe?
Yes, we should.
For sure. I mean, we just did a study in the United States. Even though Riluzole and Radicava are available, we showed that from 2017 to 2021, so 5-year period, only 30% of Medicare beneficiaries on ALS were on Riluzole, and about 10% were on Radicava. So just because there's drug approval doesn't mean there's access, and so I think I agree with you that even where there is approval, why isn't at diagnosis you are given one or both of those drugs? It behooves me. I do not understand why that doesn't happen. When I go to urgent care and I have a bacterial infection, I'm given an antibiotic. When I leave the urgent care, why isn't someone leaving an ALS specialty clinic given Riluzole and Radicava, when they leave? It's just, I don't understand that. So, and that's in a society where those two drugs are approved. So I agree, it's a problem.
Thank you, called it. And thank you for the question, everyone online and in the room. I'm sorry we have to draw that to a close to keep to time. Thank you to my panel, and thank you all.
Thank you, Nick. All right, thanks again. Thank you, Nick, for your moderation. And thanks to those joining us on Facebook. This ends our live stream. I hope you found this session valuable, and we'll see you again at webinars or other events organized by the Alliance.